Notifications work? Nice! Yeah, let's see. This Guardian article. That's Newsday, not this specific story. Okay, so I have everything pulled up that I want to. So let's get into it. Fox. Wow. See what order I talk. Hey, from the river to the sea. How about that? I wonder if this guy knows I stream. Well, since I'm playing against our homie, Mr. From the River to the Sea, rocking the Palestine colors on Fox, I guess I can talk about Palestine and the relevant subject matter there being that the ICJ ruled this morning about the Israeli assault in Rafah. So they this was like a follow-up from their previous ruling earlier in the year that Israel's actions could be plausibly said to be genocidal. Because of that, Israel has like a warning, basically. They have an affirmative obligation to prevent a genocide from occurring in the Gaza Strip, right? And so they said, like, basically, you could very easily be interpreted to be committing a genocide here, so you need to stop these actions that could potentially constitute genocide, and you need to fix that. You need to stop doing that. You know, you need to let aid through and all manner of other things. You need to stop targeting civilian infrastructure, and Israel, of course, did not stop that. So, what the ICJ said in this follow-up ruling was that, again, Israel, you are committing what we view to be potentially genocidal actions, and you must stop. In the case of Rafah specifically, what they said was to open up the ports of entry, the borders, since Israel had seized the border crossings. And they had to also do some other stuff, like I think withdraw troops from Rafah as well. Let me take the opportunity to pull up the Guardian article. Here we go. ICJ orders Israel to halt assault on Gaza's Rafah, which is a small region in Rafah, in the southern end. Yeah, here we go. They said conditions were met for a new emergency order. Judges at the top UN court ordered Israel to halt its military assault on the southern Gaza city of Rafah, according to Reuters, I think. Oh, wow, that kills. Reading out a ruling by the International Court of Justice. Oh, no. Or the World Court, rather. It's, I guess, sometimes known. The body's president, Nawaf Salam, said provisional measures ordered by the court in March did not fully address the situation in Gaza now, and conditions had been met for a new emergency order. basically saying that, like, things have gotten so bad over there that the conditions we outlined in our initial order don't cut it anymore. You know, things have only gotten worse since then. Which, I mean, yeah, that's a pretty accurate summation of what's going on in Gaza right now. Israel must immediately halt its military offensive in Rafah, he said. And this is one of the top judges in the UN. I'm dead. The court, referring to the ICJ, backed a South African request to order Israel to halt its offensive in Rafah a week after Pretoria called for the measure in a case accusing Israel of genocide. I guess Pretoria is like the lawyer for South Africa or something like that. Reuters reports that outside the court, a small group of pro-Palestinian demonstrators waved flags and played a rap on a boombox calling for a free Palestine. Very cool. Israel has repeatedly dismissed the case's accusations of genocide as baseless, arguing in court that its operations in Gaza are self-defense, targeted at Hamas militants who attacked Israel on the 7th of October, which, by the way, is the same defense that the Nazis used in their persecution of Jews and ethnic minorities, is that they were attacked first. That, you know, this was self-defense by Germany during World War II. This was the Nazis' argument, and that they had to take action because they were being aggressed upon. And obviously, although, like, obviously there's going to be terrorism in any very tense political situation, that doesn't justify the repression or wholesale slaughter of a whole ethnic group. You know? It didn't then, it doesn't now. Ethical principles tend to be pretty consistent in that way. Ah! I thought I could get the tech on that, but I mistimed it. An Israeli spokesperson said on the eve of Friday's decision that no power on earth will stop Israel from protecting its citizens and going after Hamas in Gaza. This is after the court has found that most of what Israel is doing is just targeting civilian infrastructure. And in fact, what every reliable statistic that we have indicates that Israel's target, if they have a target at all, is civilians and not Hamas. They don't care that much about, like, actually combating an ideologically far-right force, because their government is far-right, and their issue is with the population of Palestine and not with anything about Hamas specifically. You know? Ooh. Nice back there. The best faux pas. Israel launched its assault on Rafah last month and forced people there to flee the city. In fact, I believe, as far as we know, about 800,000 people have already been displaced just from Rafah. And Rafah was known to be housing a very significant portion of the 2.3-ish million people who were living in the Gaza Strip at large. You know. In fact, I believe there are actually no Palestinians left in the Gaza Strip who haven't been, at the very least, displaced. This already reaches the level of an ethnic cleansing. If this were to stop right now, if what Israel did would, stop right now, full stop, this would already be one of the biggest ethnic cleansings we've ever seen. You know, millions displaced, hundreds of thousands dead. Like, it's bad. It's really bad out there. I saw a lot of people like Ryan Grimm say that Israel was trying to push all Palestinians into Rafah and kill them all. What Israel did was so bad, we need to hold people accountable, even if they were pro-Palestine. I actually don't think Ryan Grimm was wrong to say that, because fundamentally, even if Israel doesn't go about it in that direct of a way, I think he's correct insofar as what Israel is doing in Rafah, in the Gaza Strip. Rafah would pushing Palestinians to the fringe such that they were in Rafah, such that they are still in Rafah. The only conceivable purpose that you could have in doing that is to create one giant turkey shoot where you kill Palestinians en masse. Israel's just kind of, what they're doing is more or less stringing things along. They're sort of stringing it along slowly, at least slower than they would potentially like to, because they know that the world is watching, and so they're waiting for an opportunity, basically, to spring the trigger on a giant, shooting fish in a barrel moment, where they think the world won't be really paying attention, where they can get away with it, you know? The hope is just that they, that the world is paying enough attention, and if the pressure turns up enough, that, you know, all they can do is kind of create those conditions. Still incredibly bad, and will result in tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of deaths. It's just, the question is, are they going to get to do the turkey shoot? The proper turkey shoot. You know, where they start the, we're ready to kill all of them, as opposed to just 10% of them, like we have been doing. So I think Ryan Grimm is actually correct to say that, because ultimately Israel's project here is one of wide-scale extermination, you know? The actions that Israel takes, if they keep taking them, only lead to one place, and that is the wholesale slaughter of all Palestinians. It's just a matter of how long the clock runs until they get to that point, and whether or not the international community is going to pressure Israel enough to stop that clock before the full thing is finished. You know? The classic, recover high and never die. Oh wow, that reached? That's kind of crazy. I don't know if Israel has the capability to fight for that long. They might not. I mean, the US is in their corner, so Israel can basically, there's a really long way that they can go before they run out of, equipment and stuff. But, you know, like I said, in more ways than one, this is a game of running out the clock, because even the US support for Israel is growing a little bit more tenuous by the day, since you know, the Israel is acting more and more like a rogue state on the world stage, and you know, they're getting so insane that even the US is having a hard time justifying supporting them. So, like I said, that's one of the ways in which hopefully the clock runs out before Israel can fully realize its genocidal ambitions here. Ah, I'm dead. Other countries in the area, like Iran, will just keep funding Hamas and other groups like it. Yeah, because the US is so fucking stubborn that we feel like we have to have a wedge in the Middle East to basically destabilize things. That's what the US project there is destabilization. The United States is trying to push Iran out of the Middle East in terms of geopolitical influence, but the problem is Iran is a large country located in the Middle East. It's not even a Sisyphean task. It's an impossible task. You know, the U.S. is trying to do something it knows it can never achieve, right? And like the only competent way for the U.S. to realize its geopolitical objectives here, if its geopolitical objectives are anything at all, is basically to cede the Middle East functionally to Iran in a direct sense, and then normalize relations with Iran so that we can, at the very least, have some sort of pull with what they do in the region. Or something like that, you know? Because half the reason, in fact, the full reason that Iran funds groups like Hamas and the Houthis and whatever is because we're there. If we weren't there, those groups wouldn't exist. They wouldn't need to exist. And in fact, you know, the circumstances that produce those groups wouldn't exist. If things were more stable in the Middle East, i.e. if we were gone from the Middle East, then, like, there wouldn't be Hamas, there wouldn't be a Houthis, there wouldn't be a, well, I'm not going to say there wouldn't be an ISIS, because ISIS operates outside of the Middle East as well. But there wouldn't be a lot of things. A lot of the problems in the Middle East would be solved gradually over time. If the U.S. just scaled back our involvement there, and started normalizing relations and taking a more diplomatic approach. Hell, even the way we behave with countries like China is more sensible than the way we behave with countries like Iran. You know, the U.S. isn't as openly belligerent with China of all countries, as we are with Iran. And as a result, Asia's a little bit more stable. The you know, East Asia and whatever. A lot of these groups hate Israel no matter what, partly because of anti-Jewishness. Yeah, and you know what? That's also partly our fault, because Israel, we haven't been, like, keeping Israel functionally on a leash. The, like, radicalization in these parts of the world, obviously there's going to be a lot of anti-Semitism no matter what, right? There's not much we can do about that. You know, unless you want to literally nuke every single country in the Middle East, which I don't think is a good idea. That hate is stoked further by the U.S. Constantly enabling Israel to act like a rogue state and just blow shit up. Half the shit that Israel does in the Middle East is just some random drone strike against a neighboring country that just flares up diplomatic tensions and makes people hate Israel more, and makes these groups have way more of a lever by which to promote their existence. You know? Israel is the architect of its own misfortune in that way. And the US as well, for enabling it. And of course, there's also the massive conflation that everybody is susceptible of making, that somehow Jewish people equals Israel, which I don't, you know, obviously I don't agree with, and Israel is perpetuating. If you take a look at all the pro-Israel talking points, all of them revolve around the concept of Israel and Jewish people being the same. And that's something that the US also hasn't been very willing to clamp down on, because we just see anti-Semitism as some sort of political football. The US in some ways is also very anti-Semitic, just not as much as, and not as vitriolic as some countries in the Middle East and stuff like that. Legitimately, like, Israel just needs to fucking stop and remember that they do what we tell them to do. Like, you are not an independent country, bitch. You know, you operate basically at the behest of the United States because no other country likes you. And, you know, you're a flawed wedge, geopolitical wedge for the US, so you gotta, you know, get with the program. And even the US program in the Middle East is not great. So we withdraw support from Israel and hope that their nukes will be enough to deter these terrorist groups. I generally don't know. I have no solid solution. No, what the U.S. needs to do is reassert our geopolitical interests over those of Israel, right? Obviously, if the U.S. withdrew entirely from supporting Israel, then, like, the results would be disastrous, right? What we need to do is stop arming them. Still give them stuff for the Iron Dome, because that protects them from invasion. you know, from that point, it's like, you know, stop giving them offensive weapons, and basically be way stricter with the conditions for aid that we are willing to give them. That isn't just Iron Dome stuff. Seriously, even previous administrations, Republican administrations, were better about this than the Biden administration is right now. Reagan and Bush Jr. both conditioned aid to Israel on them, like, not being absolutely fucking insane. Reagan basically called Israel during the Lebanon invasion. Israel started doing pogroms during the Lebanon invasion, and said, like, look, you gotta stop killing people, otherwise you're not getting another cent. And you know what happened? The pogroms stopped, because Israel knew that the US is its only lifeline here. So we have to exercise our leverage as that lifeline. You know? Basically, like, no more bombing random shit in Jordan and Syria and wherever else. No more, like, pushing Palestine to the fringes. You gotta recognize borders of Palestine. No more illegal settlements, and shit like that. And we're mostly going to play things very hands-off, even if that means that countries become more aligned with Iran, because who the fuck cares which country is aligned with who on the world stage? Ultimately, the US is still the global hegemon, so everybody's got to do business with us. Ultimately, the key thing there is stop exercising so much hard power. Stop using the military for everything. Stop, like, bombing places. You know? Because a lot of these insurgent groups that are being funded by Iran are not astroturfed insurgent groups. They are organic insurgent groups that Iran is simply fanning the flames of, right? Those insurgent groups would exist with or without Iran because we get involved in the Middle East militarily. Terrorism is not a thing that you stop. It's a thing that you solve. You know, it's like crime. It's basically the geopolitical equivalent of the crime discourse, or something like that. You don't stop terrorism by blowing up terrorists and by shooting them and sending in troops. In fact, that's how you make it worse. You know, in the same way that cops only perpetuate issues with of crime by over-policing minority neighborhoods and like making things even more desperate, such that even more people are disillusioned, desperate, and like alienated by society. Think of the insurgent groups in the Middle East basically just as an impoverished neighborhood that the US is over-policing, because that's the only way we're willing to engage with it. Instead, we need to be investing and normalizing relations and things like that. And for the love of fuck, the United States needs to cut all relations with Saudis. We need to make them into the pariah state that they are. Ooh, no tech. We should have just put the Jewish state in America or Europe. Better yet, we shouldn't have made a Jewish state. Israel was a fucking mistake. It's incredibly anti-Semitic as a concept that, hey, we're going to have one ethno-state where we put all the Jewish people, because because we're not willing to commit to making a politically inclusive environment for Jews in our own country. That's what the motivation was for the creation of Israel. It was a giant liberal virtue signal from a bunch of people who weren't willing to actually rectify the mistakes that led to the anti-Semitism of pre-war Europe. The anti-Semitism was that, like, a lot of countries didn't accept Jews even when they were citizens of that country. So what? You don't fix the problem, you just create a separate country where all the Jews go live? That's literally segregation writ large. That's just, you've done segregation, but instead of neighborhoods, it's entire countries. You know? And look what it produced. It produced an apartheid state, basically where Jewish people were now the ones doing the white supremacy bit, you know? At least certain like ethnicities of Jewish people, because Israel is like kind of like if we made a place in Africa for all the slaves after the Civil War. Yeah, and that was an actual plan that was being considered. Like Liberia is that. It's a bunch of well, not entirely. Liberia is like halfway realized version of that. There's a proposed state in Central America in the 1850s and 60s, I believe, called Lincolnia, where, like, this was one of the proposed emancipation plans by the Republican Party, back when it was a Social Democratic Party, with Abraham Lincoln at the head of things. That basically all the freed slaves would go live in Lincolnia in Central America. Nice. Alright, now to finally finish up this article. South Africa's lawyers asked the ICJ last week to impose emergency measures, saying Israel's attacks on Rafah must be stopped to ensure the survival of the Palestinian people. The court is the highest UN body for hearing disputes between states. The court, unfortunately, has no enforcement powers. So I'll touch on that in a second. South Africa's wider case at the ICJ accuses Israel of orchestrating a state-led genocide against the Palestinian people. The ICJ has not ruled on the substance of that accusation. It could take years, but has rejected Israel's demand to throw the case out. In previous rulings, the court ordered Israel to prevent acts of genocide against the Palestinians and allow aid to flow into Gaza while stopping short of ordering a halt to Israeli military operations. So this is, like, they've said more here than they were prepared to say previously. Now things have reached the level where the court is actually prepared to order Israel, albeit with no enforcement power, to stop their military operations. Oh, shit. Disconnected? Damn. Okay. Oh, I'm dead. Okay, so now to touch on the fact that the ICJ actually doesn't have any power to enforce its decision, right? Effectively, the ruling is toothless. Oh, that meant to be up smash. So, you know, such is the case with many UN bodies. Court doesn't have a lot of actual political power to enforce anything that it says or decides, but it is a sort of it is a moral guideline for sure that, like, this is the sort of moral imperative or whatever for whatever that's worth, which I don't think it's worth much of anything. And what else it does is it applies some kind of some PR pressure. You know, the US now has some pressure on it to act and to prevent Israel from doing certain things in the Gaza Strip, things that could constitute genocide, potentially, if, you know, things that already constitute genocide. Okay, cool. Last stock, at least. Ooh. And the first ICJ ruling was a little bit of that pressure being applied, insofar as it was felt, which I believe it was in some ways. And then now this ruling, this later ruling by the ICJ, which is more sternly worded, which, you know, I'm not usually, not being a liberal, I'm not usually inclined to assign importance to any sort of sternly worded letters. You know, yeah, that'll really show them. But really, what this is supposed to do is further alienate Israel, and by extension the United States a little bit, from the international community. The international community has been, to the extent that it wasn't already, turning against Israel slowly but surely, at least, you know, from the perspective of Western countries that weren't already, like, predisposed to support Palestine. And the US seems to be actually the lone holdout out of those countries that still supports Israel. This ruling is meant to sort of drive the knife in further, say like, hey, United States, you lose more and more credibility every day that you support Israel, or something like that, you know? Effectively, you know, you supporting this is going to get you, it's not going to get you far. And this is one more building block for the United States running out of political capital, basically. Hard to quantify, hard to, like, talk about. Some of it is up to vibes, but it's supposed to, like, make the United States choose between, okay, do you want to support Israel, or do you want to maintain your status as, like, the leader of the free world and the top dog on the world stage? Because ultimately you cannot have both. If you, like... If you support Israel, if you keep supporting Israel, eventually you will be standing on trial beside them, you know? So do you want that, or do you want to cut your losses now? Israel itself could admit to genocide, and the US would be like, Israel, stop this abhorrent anti-Semitism. Yeah, it would be a little bit like that. You know, that's the relationship that the US currently has with Israel, because we're desperate to protect the wedge that we have in the Middle East. But, you know, again, the game here is to try to bleed the US of political capital because of the genocide we're using that capital to support, to such an extent that we would, you know, again, be in that spot of, like, do you continue supporting the genocide, or do you preserve your place on the international stage, right? I'm good. You find it at all concerning that ICJ is not charging Israel genocide yet? People still cling to that accusation. No, actually, I find it pretty appropriate that the ICJ isn't, like, using the strongest terms possible yet, because the ICJ has no real enforcement power, right? If they could say that, like, Israel's committing a genocide, which it is, and they've said that could plausibly be said to be the case, that, like, you know, Israel argued that, like, hey, you should dismiss this case. The ICJ said, no, we won't do that. We can't do that because this case has merit. You know, such is the case in legal proceedings such as this. Like I was just talking about, which, welcome to chat, this is a game of, like, they kind of already know that Israel is committing a genocide, but they have to structure their rulings in such a way that they can do something, and they couldn't really do that if they just unloaded it all at once. You know, this is meant to run the US and Israel slowly out of political capital, so that the choice then becomes, for the US, do you abandon Israel to the international community, in the sense that, like, you let Israeli officials be charged with war crimes and tried, or do you preserve your standing on the international world stage while, or do you continue supporting Israel's actions, continue supporting a genocide at the cost of your standing on the international stage. You know, it's an attempt to like sort of make the U.S. Pick which route it wants to take and stuff like that. Would it change your mind at all if the chief judge of the court said they didn't say it was plausibly a genocide? No, because I'm not a liberal and I don't form my opinion based on what the high priests of law say. But ultimately, you know, that makes it easier for me either way, because the court, even if not the high judge specifically, did say that it could plausibly be said that Israel is committing a genocide, or like their actions could plausibly amount to a genocide. In the initial ruling. So I don't really need to make that decision. That's not correct, though. Loner box, hold on. Guy that doesn't lie habitually? I might want to check that out. Okay, so I didn't have the time to fully check the post while I was streaming, but this is where a lot of dishonesty and Gish galloping starts, that becomes more evident later. The actual ruling from the ICJ back in January said that, quote, at least some of the rights claimed by South Africa and for which it is seeking protection are plausible, unquote, including, quote, the right of Palestinians in Gaza to be protected from acts of genocide and related prohibited acts, unquote. The court saying that there is merit or plausibility to the argument of Palestinians' rights to not be genocided is being violated is just a more politically careful way of saying that Israel could be plausibly said to be committing a genocide against Palestinians. Or you could also go by the incredibly easily available UN Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner press release that reads, quote, the ICJ found it plausible that Israel's acts could amount to genocide and issued 6 provisional measures, unquote, which it then goes on to list. As I have already said, and will say again, what the court did or didn't exactly say is irrelevant to my argument on Israel committing this genocide. But the minutia is important to bring up only because what this person is doing is splitting hairs, or rather, making a distinction without a difference. This is done to front their real position, which comes up later, namely the idea that Israel is justified in its actions because Hamas has taken hostages or human shields, and ultimately that actually the Palestinians should be held responsible here for being so darn violent against Israel. I only wish I was joking. Yeah, this debate took a lot out of me. You might be able to tell by the sorry state my voice is in. Now back to it. I like Loner Blocks a lot, yeah? Welcome to chat. Can't prove genocide without intent, since we don't have military or administrative documentation of intent available. It can't be proven yet. I think it could be proven. In fact, it'd be really easy to prove intent on the part of Israel. Just look at what the fucking government officials of Israel say all the goddamn time. Look at what their pundits say, what widespread attitudes in the military indicate. Oh, okay. Well, then there we go. You can easily disprove intent given the circumstances, actions over words. I think actions provide a much more clear picture of intent than words even, right? Talking about the UN definition. Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, in a court of law, obviously, this stuff gets a lot muddier. But as far as proving intent, the intent, in my opinion, is way more there with actions even than with words. And they've been pretty liberal with their words in regards to whether or not they intend to kill all the Palestinians. You know, they've basically met every single stage of the genocide, except for the part where they've actually finished the genocide and they're all dead, right? Indiscriminately targeting civilian infrastructure, doing what many UN experts call a scholasticide, not just like it bombing indiscriminately, but actually targeting elements of civilian life so that conditions of life are unlivable. you know, it's impossible to call this anything other than a genocide at this stage, especially when you consider what the real death toll must be if the reported numbers, in as sorry a state as infrastructure is in the Gaza Strip, is already, you know, is like 35,000. If it was a special intent to destroy the ethnicity of Palestinians, why is Israel allowing aid in? They are not. Israel is not allowing aid in. There have been many instances of Israeli mobs blocking trucks to that effect. Israel has made it as hard as possible for aid to get through any administrative processes. The only aid that has gotten through to Gaza is as a product of the United States saying, Israel, you have to allow this aid in, because there's the implied, if you don't, then there will be consequences. Israel is not letting the aid in. The US is more or less forcing them to let it go in. If the Israeli government had its way, if the US wasn't policing Israel's actions even this little, then no aid would be getting through and things would be a lot worse. I don't care about legal arguments. You understand that, right? I'm not lib-brained. I don't argue from a perspective of legality. I argue from a perspective of ethics and like reasonable, like more likely than not, whatever. Could a lawyer, like, argue against me? Yeah, probably, but I'm not a lawyer, and ultimately I don't give a shit about the law, because if you use the law to fundamentally structure your positions of ethnicity, then you have to arrive eventually at the conclusion that some genocides are justified, because there have been genocides in history that were completely legal. The law is a very, very flawed structure from which to make arguments about ethical matters, and genocide ultimately is as much an ethical matter as anything, you know? Like the difference between murder and killing? No, it's the difference between saying this was a murder and proving that this was a murder in the courtroom. I don't give a shit about proving anything in the courtroom myself, because I'm not a lawyer, right? Also, slow the fuck down. I need to read your message and actually respond to the shit that you're saying. Because I'm trying to play and talk at the same time. Talk about politics at that. It's not an easy thing to do. Fair enough, I don't blame you. Yeah, okay. Okay, he did the up tilt. Yeah, not everyone can be Armada. I'm not as good as Armada. Very nice. That's true. That's pretty true. Dropping leaflets. The dropping of leaflets is immaterial to whether or not Israel is conducting a genocide. Because you think about the leaflets that they dropped most recently, which I think were over Rafah. They're telling people to evacuate Rafah and not giving them any instructions on where to evacuate through. All of the leaflets and shit, the like, hey, you need to evacuate, bombs are about to drop. First of all, like, the leaflets are clearly an afterthought and only introduced as plausible deniability. And then second of all, like, they wouldn't need to invoke that as a defense if they weren't dropping bombs on civilian infrastructure and civilian areas in the first place. You know, the concern first and foremost for Israel and the Israeli government is very clearly to just bomb Palestinian neighborhoods and cities, you know? And in fact, I don't think it's like, even from a you know, political perspective, I don't think it's harmful to marry myself to any of the terminology that I'm using, because like, it is very, like, widely recognized among the population of like America and elsewhere that this is a genocide. The only people who don't believe that as a demographic are politicians. Like, you could take polls of the American people And like the majority, or at least a plurality of people, would say that yes, this is genocide, or like amounts to, at the very least, an ethnic cleansing or some shit like that. And the people who argue most vehemently against that the most frequently and get the most airtime doing so are politicians who have a vested or perceived vested interest in maintaining Israel as basically a wedge for American interests in the Middle East. You know? Like, this debate has pretty much been solved from the perspective of a public opinion matter, and from a public policy perspective. And, you know, I'm not trying to make an ad populum argument here, because I don't believe that either. But it's like, Israel isn't fooling anybody, and ultimately, they're not trying very hard to fool people if that's what they're trying to do. Heavy legal term and it's being used incorrectly. Terms mean whatever they are used to mean. I don't give a shit about what the legal definition of anything is, because in a courtroom, you have to fucking haggle over what the definition of is. You know? If everybody spoke legalese, the world would be a shit place and I would kill myself. That's not the world that we live in. Lots of civilians dying equals bad, but it doesn't mean genocide. And that is a good point. But now I return to the intent and the death numbers, right? I mentioned that the death numbers are about 35,000, officially speaking, right? That's just recorded deaths. That's just deaths that we know 100% for sure about. If we're talking about things that aren't deaths, then we can include displacements in that, in which case there are actually, as far as I know, 0% of people in Palestinian are not displaced. Everybody in Palestinian that isn't dead has been displaced in some form or another, which already constitutes the definition of ethnic cleansing. Intent or not, you have displaced an entire population of people, right? That's number one. Number two, the real death numbers are much, much higher than what is being officially reported. And that's not a whole, like, oh, they're covering it up thing. It's just the infrastructure of Gaza has been so destroyed that there's not a reasonable set of tools with which to catalog the deaths. Yeah, in fact, if from my estimates, which admittedly is sloppy, right? I looked at one of those, I think a UN map, or like a map that was on Al Jazeera, of like, oh, where have people been forced to flee to within the Gaza Strip, right? You had like Khan Yunis, Gaza City, Rafah, and a couple other locations listed with a bunch of people in mostly in tent camps living there. And the numbers that I saw, from what I remember, I would have to double check this, added up to about 1.8 million, right? Which is actually a pretty significant decline from the pre-war population of Gaza of about 2.2, 2.3 million. So by that very rough estimate, that at least 10% of the Gaza population is dead or unaccounted for. Which I think in this circumstance, we can safely assume that means dead, right? So if we're giving a ballpark estimate as a matter of degrees of magnitude, 35,000 is a somewhat less accurate death estimate than something like 200,000 to 400,000 would be, which is fully, like, now we're in, this isn't just ethnic cleansing territory, this is incomplete genocide territory, right? This is a not insignificant portion of the population that has completely just been killed.
Hey, it's edited Y2K again. Excuse me. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the map I was thinking of after over an hour of searching. I fucking swear it exists, and it's out there somewhere. It was probably in one of those Al Jazeera live blogs on the ongoing genocide in Gaza. Anyways, because I don't have that, full disclosure, all I have is my own thoughts that the fog of war is so severe as a product of concerted targeting of journalists by Israel, the overall lack of any infrastructure really in Gaza, and the sheer volume and magnitude of munitions being used, many of them precision-guided American munitions, other of them being dumb munitions and things like that. I think that 35,000 is massively underselling the body count that we'll see once the dust settles. But hey, Ralph Nader agrees with my reasoning, so that's something. Anyways, now back to it.
By Israel. And even then, intent or not, I would say that constitutes an attempt at genocide. Now let's look at intent, right? The matter in which people were killed does matter in cases like this, right? And it would be one thing if all the targets were military targets. Then this would just be ethnic cleansing and a whole shitload of war crimes, right? Also bad, also meriting of prosecution in the international courts, etc., etc. But you consider that the destruction isn't just of a product of wanton war crimes, it is actually the product of specific targeting. Israel doesn't just have dumb bombs, they also have smart bombs. They have munitions that are capable of precision targeting. And what have they been using that for? Bombing neighborhoods, where, you know, predominantly civilians will be living. You know, they know they're killing civilians, and they're perfectly fine with it. In fact, they know they're killing mostly civilians, and they're perfectly fine with it. So that satisfies the, like, killing members of the group thing. Number two, as part of that, would be not just the killing of the members of the group, but bringing about conditions of life calculated to be unlivable. This was a thing already before the campaign after October 7th or whatever, but it actually ramped up after October 7th. Israel started targeting specifically historical sites, educational buildings. All of the universities in Gaza have been destroyed. Most of the hospitals have been destroyed, the places where you heal the sick, where it is in fact a war crime just on its own to target those places, never mind the kind of death toll you would incur. There has been a systematic effort to destroy the civilian infrastructure and all of the artifices of life in the Gaza Strip via bombing campaigns, Hamas or no. In fact, we have, like, only very, very spurious data on whether or not Hamas is even active in certain areas, how many Hamas fighters are still alive, and other things like that. Israel's concern is clearly more on making life unlivable for Palestinians than it is on combating terrorism, even in any, like, sloppy war on terror kind of way, right? No more schools, no more hospitals, no more, maybe not no more, but a significant decrease in historical sites as a product of targeted Israeli bombing. I would say that constitutes acts of genocide, right? In fact, I don't think there could be anything else that you would reasonably call it. Ethnic cleansing doesn't cut it at that point. That's not just forcing people out. That's you want them dead, right? Let me take a sip of water. I feel like there was one other thing I was going to say. There was CCTV footage. Okay, I recognize what that is. That's functionally, that's just the human shield argument, right? The point of the human shield argument is that you're not supposed to kill the human shields. The human shield argument falls apart when Israel is killing the human shields anyway, right? Like, Israel doesn't care. Israel doesn't care that Hamas is like, I don't know, using human shields and occupying civilian buildings. Hamas is an insurgent group. That's kind of what they do. There is a playbook already on warfare in this kind of context, right? It's an extremely taboo and, like, against international law thing to do, to take hostages and use human shields and things like that. But ultimately, if you're a state that's not committing a genocide, then you are taking that into account, which Israel is not. They are not whatsoever letting the use of human shields deter them from indiscriminate or sometimes targeted against civilians bombing campaigns, right? Israel sucks, I want a new puppet. I do too. Unironically, I think the US should just cozy up to Iraq at this point. I think that'd be a better wedge for our geopolitical interests in the Middle East. And again, I think we should be using soft power and not hard power if this is a discussion from the perspective of optimally pursuing U.S. interests. And even then, I don't care much for U.S. interests. The issue is that with your thinking, anytime a state or group wants to get something, they can just do it while hiding behind civilians and get what they want. No, actually, because you severely underestimate the amount of resources that states have at their disposal. Yes, Hamas must be so powerful that with merely a few human shields, the entire first world military capacity of Israel, a modern nation state with computer targeting, infrared sensors, like all the latest and greatest American military tech is completely helpless to stop Hamas, who has a few hostages. That's so true. I don't care for these arguments, like, at all. Furthermore, I think that anybody engaging in these arguments is pretty much acting in bad faith from the get-go. I just don't care for it. Like, hostage situations make the news because they take a long time to resolve. It takes time, obviously. But, like, it's not this sort of ultimate trump card that you can just instantly get what you want if you have a hostage. The FBI is still gonna fucking surround the building if you take a hostage. That doesn't mean you win. It means now you have the whole FBI on your ass, and there's gonna be a prolonged several-day standoff before they shoot you in the head. You know? And again, that's from the perspective of if you're not shooting the human shields. What you've said is fundamentally just an argument in favor of killing the human shields, which is not what you're supposed to do. That's why we frown on taking human shields in the first place. Because you're not supposed to kill them. While you're waiting for the situation to resolve, Hamas shoots rockets indiscriminately into Israel, or hell, even their own neighborhoods. Yeah, and all 0 of them are going to hit Israel because of the Iron Dome. That, like, all of what you've said just makes, like, yeah, damn, bad things happen as a result of insurgent groups that are created by, like, conditions of extreme desperation and shit. I'm arguing that you get rid of the people who think using human shields is worth the cost. And this is where your analysis of the issue falls vastly short, is to even get people that are desperate enough to use human shields, there has to be a very, very severe set of conditions in the first place, which Israel has created. In order to not get people to take human shields, you have to have conditions that don't drive people fucking insane. It's the same kind of thing with the discussion about crime. In order to prevent crime, and on the broader scale terrorism, from happening, you have to not have such dire material conditions that people will resort to either crime or terrorism. When things are stable, then people don't do that. The problem is, Israel has made things so terminally unstable in the Middle East that groups like Hamas pop up, like, wantonly. And of course the United States hasn't helped there as well. The US has done our fair share of making things shit in the Middle East. And then the only solution that they're prepared to offer is, what if we liquidate Hamas and also everyone they hold hostage? Which even then, even if it was just we're considering the fact that they're taking hostages, we want all the hostages to come home safe and whatever, but we're still going to vaporize Hamas. That doesn't solve anything. All you've done is kill a couple dozen insurgents, right? If you're interested in actually fixing the problem and not in defending your chosen country of interest, then what you'd be interested in doing is de-escalating the situation and like ultimately eliminating the conditions that make groups like Hamas possible in the first place, most of which are the fault of Israel. Hamas functionally is like an insane extremist group, like we've both agreed here. But it's like if you went and released a group, like a canister of sarin gas in a crowded room, and then told people your beef is with the sarin gas, not me for releasing it. It's absolutely insane. This is like force of nature shit. Basic sociology. Same can be applied to how right-wing militarized Israel has taken over the country the past few decades on the back on the intifadas and rejected peace negotiations. And that's still on Israel for rejecting those negotiations. Ultimately, that That problem could be solved by America taking a much harder stance on what we allow Israel to do in containing them, preventing those circumstances from arising in the first place. Israel made Hamas possible. They made Hamas the only possibility, and now they're whining about it because they want an excuse to pulverize all of Palestine. Yeah, I just think Palestinians have more agency than an inanimate object like gas. If you think that, then you're delusional right now, because Palestinians have nothing. What the fuck kind of agency do Palestinians have? They die from starvation, they die from an Israeli bomb, or they die from an Israeli gunshot, or they die from, like, I don't know, blowing themselves up. There is no alternative to there is no agency in that situation. Any route that you pick, you're gonna die young, right? Like I said, material conditions here are so, like, dire as a product of things that Israel has done, policy choices that Israel has made, that, like, this kind of sentiment is inevitable. None of what you're suggesting, none of what you're saying, you're putting everything on the group that has the least amount of power in this situation. Fundamentally, everything that you're doing right now is blaming the victims for being so desperate that they resort to becoming the abuser themselves, right? Like, oh, wow, Israel has been blocking, like, the path for negotiations at literally every step of the way. Maybe the Palestinians should be nicer. Fucking what? I think it's racist to... Oh, now you're levying it. Yeah, very cute. Anyways, you're banned, but not before I address those accusations. Here, I'll time you out, and then I will address those accusations, and then I will ban you. Palestinians are perfectly capable of being peaceful. That's not what I said. If you took the time to address things that I said, instead of things that you would like to imagine that I said, you would know that. But you're bad faith, so I don't care. Palestinians, for the most part, are very peaceful. Hamas is such a small fighting force that, like, we don't even know how many of them there are. There definitely aren't, like, fucking 2.2 million of them. And, by the way, it is also very racist to assume that when, you know, when Palestinians join Hamas or whatever, that is representative of all Palestinians. You're the only racist in chat right now. And furthermore, like I said, this is an inevitable circumstance. What you're attempting to do here is refute basic sociology in a way that, like, puts the onus of crime on the people who are desperate enough to resort to it, and not the state for creating circumstances that are so impoverished that people, like, get driven insane, get driven to the brink. Take a fucking sociology class, for the love of God. And also, don't ever come back to my chat. Sorry, I want pizza. I apologize for that. New debate topic. Should we call Clarence Thomas the N-word? Yes, tactically. Don't quote me on that. No, it's incredibly telling that even people who are like, anybody who acts like that person and fucking whinges like a sniveling little liberal over the use of the term genocide, it, like, eventually just resorts to saying, well, actually, all of this is the Palestinians' fault. Like, for the love of fuck. Like, what do you expect the Palestinians to do? What, in your mind, could the Palestinians have done to, like, not have this happen at this fucking late stage of the game, right? And, like, obviously that's a rhetorical question, because the answer is nothing. And by avoid this at this late stage in the game, I mean avoid Israel committing a genocide against them. Oh my god. Just no fucking concern for the Palestinian deaths at all. Like, oh, not do you want to, like, fucking talk about what Israel can do? Like, I think it's pretty clear what Israel can do. Here's what the fucking Palestinians, who are starving currently, can do to you know, not be so mean to the Israelis. Like, are you fucking kidding me? This is fundamentally, like I said several times, this is the same logic that fucking 1350 posters use to blame all crime on black people, is to say that, well, black people are just worse. Because that's the argument that's being invoked there. Sorry, I don't think that Palestinians have no agency. Like, and you know, they should just be peaceful. Like, yeah, okay, cool. Why don't you try that when you, like, I don't know, when all you have is bombed out neighborhoods, even more so than the past 70 years. Jesus fucking Christ. I'm getting a lot more flustered than I should be. I just shouldn't have engaged. Truth be told, I just should not have engaged. You'll find, by the way, the same kind of people, if you open the history books, you will find the same kind of people in Europe who did genocide apologia for the Nazi Germans, for the Nazi Germany government, saying that, well, I just think that Jews shouldn't have provoked them so much, etc., etc. You could fundamentally apply everything that person just said, not just to black people and crime in America, but to Jews in like Weimar Germany or anything like that. Fundamental misunderstanding of the issue, and it's you know, it's like the fucking terminal bug of liberalism. Like, I support all of the oppressed peoples in history except for the current one, and I oppose all genocides in history except for the current one, because I don't think it's a genocide actually because of XYZ, even though it meets every single fucking criteria of genocide. Jesus Christ. I thought he was good faith until he called you racist. Yeah, I thought that since he was a, like, loner box viewer, that he would be good faith and understand where I was coming from, and ultimately not just push the issue. Like, it's insane how much they, like, everything they said was just a fucking whataboutism. And, like, you know, attempting to say, like, oh, well, you know, Israel is actually the victim in this too. I don't give a shit. Israel is not the victim of anything. Israelis might be the victim of some stuff because, you know, they live in a modern nation state. But, like, all Israel has done is be a, like, imperial power in the Middle East. Like, there hasn't been a single time, I think, where Israel could be said to be acting in self-defense apart from, like, I don't know, the initial phases of like the wars of war 1967. I believe the Arab League declared that one. Like, every action that Israel has taken has been in service of, we want the Palestinians out of this land, and we want to build settlements in this land. It's like, this is the lowest possible bar for recognizing a genocide, and people still fumble, which is unbelievable to me. Although that's not entirely true. I said it's unbelievable. I can actually fully believe it. Like I said, that guy wasn't acting in good faith. Oh, what a wave dash. Anyways, hopefully that's this should conclude the segment about me talking about the ICJ ruling. Yeah. I think most historical experts at this stage are also, like, pretty comfortable calling it a genocide, which... Conversations like that always sour my mood a bit. Jesus, the degree to which they were willing to bend over backwards to justify Israel's actions, just violating the most basic, like, concepts of what we understand about political behavior, because, like, well, it's Israel, so it must be justified. And obviously they never said that, but, like, that's the only consistent line of logic that they could, like, that I could see them drawing, is that, oh, actually, this is on the Palestinians, the group which probably holds the least amount of leverage in the world right now in terms of political capital, and not on Israel, a modern nation state with the, like, with the full support and backing of the United States, the single global hegemon, by the way, that gets all sorts of fucking military funding from the United States. Meanwhile, Hamas is using glorified bottle rockets and like flailing desperately because they're like they're resorting to violence to even get any sort of attention. If, like, let's be real, if there weren't some sort of armed resistance as a concept in Palestine, then the world would be fucking silent and Israel would just have its genocide, no questions asked. And the only reason that Hamas is the armed resistance and not, say, a better group like the PLO or the, like, I don't know, DFLP, PFLP, like any one of those groups that has like a more defensible core ideology, the only reason that Hamas won out is because Israel made them win out. Israel, like, suppressed all other forms of political opposition in the Gaza Strip, so that Hamas would be the face of Palestine. And that was an intentional policy decision, or set of policy decisions, so that Palestine as a concept would be delegitimized and associated with Islamist terrorism in the mind of the international community. And on schmucks like that, it clearly worked. Person was also quite good at inferring things that I did not say, or reading things into my arguments that I didn't say. Am I wrong, or has polling shown that neither government entities are popular with the population? It has shown that. The population of Gaza supports Fatah. Fatah is the center-left party that currently governs the West Bank. That's the party of the Palestinian Authority. They have a nominally like center-left platform, and they have something like 60% support to 40, or like 50-something to 40-something Hamas. Like, Hamas only enjoys a minority of support in the West Bank, right? Israel doesn't care about like going after Hamas. In fact, like I said, they need them there so they have an excuse to bomb Palestinians in carpet bombing campaigns, you know? And yeah, you're right about Israel as well. Nobody in Israel fucking likes Netanyahu. In fact, there have been a lot of Israelis, maybe not a majority, but a lot of them, who have said that Netanyahu has taken the bombing campaigns too far, because a lot of the Israeli bombing campaigns have actually killed Israeli hostages that have been held in Gaza. And for anybody who might still be a little bit, you know, maybe dissatisfied with me not having covered as much as maybe I should have in this conversation, like, I realized I wanted to mention this, but didn't really get the chance, so I will now. If you're, let's say you're in charge of certain things in Israel or Palestine, and you're at this stage of the game, you know, bombing campaigns, Hamas is the party in power in the Gaza Strip. Basically, snap your fingers right now and put yourself in charge of Israel. How do you fix this? Well, number one, you stop bombing. Number two, you recognize Palestine. Basically, you just stop the military campaign, recognize Palestine, and like, start building up the state infrastructure, understanding that there's going to be, number one, growing pains associated with developing a country, and number two, that it's going to take time for these circumstances to basically BTFO Hamas out of existence. Because the reason that Hamas exists could be addressed with Palestinian statehood. If Palestine had statehood, and not the kind of fucking weirdo quasi-statehood that it has now, where Israel controls all their resources and military equipment and essential aid and things like that, but like proper statehood, they control their own resources, they have their own government, independent of Israel, then they wouldn't elect Hamas. They would elect something like Fatah, or another like pretty standard political party. And you know what? That would actually, might not on its own, but would go significant way to solving the Israel-Palestine conflict for like generations. But Israel isn't willing to do that because they don't want to solve the conflict. They want to kill all the Palestinians. You know? if you eliminate the grievances that Palestinians have with Israel, the legitimate ones, then there's going to be like a way reduced presence of people who use those legitimate grievances to pull people into extremist organizations. This is just basic sociology, basic politics. Like, I hesitate to say common sense, but it basically is that. It's like the whole people don't commit crime usually if they don't have a reason to. There's I think I've talked about this in another video at some point, but it is certainly a thing that some people will just experiment with breaking the rules and whatever when they're young and stuff like that. And some people genuinely have like personality disorders or mental illnesses or whatever that make them act that lead to them acting very erratically and stuff like that. But again, all of these things are rooted in material conditions that can fundamentally be addressed. If people don't need to commit crime, they will not commit crime to like try to vent or get grievances out there or resolve poor living conditions or whatever. You know? And for the people who are committing crimes as a result of like erratic behavior from mental illness or whatever, then you need only make counseling services and mental health services massively available and accessible. And boom, you've now cut crime down to like 1% of what it was effortlessly, or basically effortlessly. And then anything else you can then examine the edge cases with, you know, legal professionals and social workers, police, like whatever it is, right? Just replace crime with terrorism. And it's fundamentally, it's the same problem and the same solution. If you eliminate the like political forces that would make people want to join Hamas or Islamic Jihad or any other group, then they won't join that. And if there are still some people who join as a result of mental deficiency of some kind, then you can address those mental deficiencies. But all of that requires you to stop bombing the Gaza Strip and stop killing Palestinians and build up the Gaza Strip, build up Palestine, give it its own state, give it its own framework of addressing these issues, basically transform it into a modern nation state, which Israel doesn't want to do because their objective is not to fix anything, rather it's to kill people. But I've waffled for long enough. This is going to be a very long segment.